The gunner tested anti-aircraft rounds in silence, then fired the shot that downed the Ace August 14, 1944. USS Hornet, 85 nautical miles northeast of Saipan, 11:47 hours. Gunner's mate, First Class Robert Carlson, watches the radar scope with the kind of attention that comes from 3 years of combat and too many near misses. The 5-inch 38 gun mount he commands on Hornet's starboard side has fired 4,127 rounds since Pearl Harbor. He's kept count. Every shell, every target, every miss, especially the misses. The radar operator's voice cuts through the combat information center noise. Bogey inbound, bearing 095, range 12 miles, altitude 18,000 feet, speed 320 knots. Profile matches Mitsubishi A6M0, single aircraft. Carlson's fingers move to the fire control computer without conscious thought. 12 miles. Maybe 4 minutes to engagement range if the Zero maintains course. Probably less. Japanese pilots don't maintain course. They jink and weave and spiral because they know American anti-aircraft fire is predictable. You aim where the plane is going to be. The plane doesn't go there. The shells explode in empty sky. Load VT, Carlson says quietly. His gun crew hesitates. The loader, Seaman James Mitchell, looks uncertain. Sir, we're supposed to save VT rounds for mass formations. Standing orders from load VT, Carlson repeats. His voice is flat, allowing no argument. And nobody talks about what we're firing. Not now, not later, not ever. Mitchell loads the shell. It looks identical to a standard 5-inch high explosive round, but it's not. Inside the nose cone, packed in a space smaller than a coffee can, is the most sophisticated piece of electronics ever put into an artillery shell. A miniature radar transmitter receiver, vacuum tubes, capacitors, and a trigger circuit that will detonate the shell when it passes within 70 feet of a target. No timer setting required. No precise range calculation. Just point fire and let physics do the work. The VT, variable time. Fuse is the most closely guarded secret in the U.S. Navy's arsenal, more classified than most code-breaking operations. So secret that using it requires explicit permission from task force commanders. And even then, only against massed targets, where the tactical benefit outweighs the risk of Japanese forces capturing an intact shell and reverse engineering the technology. 1-0, flying alone doesn't qualify as a scenario worth risking the secret. Carlson is violating direct orders by loading VT ammunition. If the shell fails to detonate, if it falls into the ocean intact, if Japanese forces recover it, he'll face court-martial. If his gun mount commander discovers he's using restricted ammunition without authorization, he'll face disciplinary action regardless of outcome. For 3 weeks, Carlson had been tracking a distinctive attack pattern. Not necessarily the same pilot, but a consistent tactical approach that suggested an elite operator. The consistent altitude profile, northeast approach vector, and solo operations formed a recognizable signature. In 3 weeks, this pilot has damaged 4 U.S. ships, including 2 fleet carriers. Hornet took a bomb on the flight deck on July 28th that killed 11 sailors and put the ship out of action for 8 days. The bomb came from a Zero that appeared from nowhere, dropped its payload with impossible accuracy, and disappeared into cloud cover before a single shot could be fired in response. Intelligence reports identified the pilot as Warrant Officer Saburo Kitamura, 23 years old, 57 confirmed kills, one of the Imperial Japanese Navy's elite, not as famous as some aces, Sakai, Nishizawa, Iwamoto, but equally dangerous. Maybe more dangerous because he's less predictable. While other aces fly in formations and follow doctrine, Kitamura hunts alone. He's an assassin, not a warrior. Surgical strikes against high-value targets. And he's inbound right now, 9 miles and closing. Carlson had engaged aircraft displaying this same distinctive attack pattern twice before during the 3-week period. Both times with conventional ammunition. Both times the Zero evaded through precise maneuvering that suggested the pilot could anticipate where shells would explode. But VT fuses don't care about altitude prediction. They detonate when they get close to the target, period. No prediction required. The shell just has to pass within 70 feet. Against a maneuvering target, that's revolutionary. Traditional time fuses require detonation within perhaps 20 feet to achieve lethal fragmentation, demanding extremely precise range calculations. VT multiplies the effective kill radius by more than 3, turning near misses into hits. The problem is that VT ammunition is experimental. It works beautifully in testing, hit rates improve by factors of 10 or more, but it's only been in combat deployment since January 1943, and initial results are mixed. The electronics are fragile. Acceleration forces during firing sometimes damage the vacuum tubes. Saltwater corrosion affects reliability. Perhaps 15% of VT rounds fail to detonate. For every shell that performs as designed, one fails completely. And if this shell fails, if it falls into the ocean without detonating and Japanese forces recover it, they'll have the Americans' most valuable tactical innovation handed to them on a plate. They'll reverse engineer the proximity fuse, equip their own anti-aircraft guns, and U.S. aircraft losses will skyrocket. Using VT against a single zero, especially one flown by an elite pilot who might survive being hit and return to base with intelligence about American capabilities, violates every protocol. But Carlson has reached a point where protocols matter less than results. Kitamura has killed American sailors. Kitamura is coming to kill more. And Carlson has exactly one chance to stop him. Range 8 miles, the radar operator calls. Target maintaining course and altitude. Designate target Alpha 1, priority fire mission. The fire control computer hums, processing radar data and calculating firing solutions. But Carlson isn't waiting for the computer. He's been tracking aircraft manually for 3 years, building an intuitive sense of trajectories and timing that no machine can replicate. He adjusts elevation by feel, leading the target by instinct. The gun mount swings smoothly, tracking empty sky where Kitamura will be in 90 seconds. Carlson focused on the immediate threat, unaware that his decision to use VT ammunition represented the culmination of a massive research program. The proximity fuse was supposed to revolutionize anti-aircraft warfare, but had proven unreliable in early deployment. Using it required a courage that bordered on recklessness or desperation. Sometimes those look identical. The whine of the engine became a scream. The zero was almost on them. Too much hope. Not enough certainty. American and British anti-aircraft guns in 1940 required an average of 2,500 shells to down a single enemy aircraft. 2,500 shells, thousands of pounds of explosives, hundreds of hours of gun crew labor, enormous expenditure of resources for one kill. The math was unsustainable. If air warfare continued to evolve as predicted, with faster aircraft and higher altitudes, anti-aircraft gunnery would become effectively useless. The British were the first to recognize the crisis. In summer 1940, during the Battle of Britain, Royal Navy anti-aircraft batteries fired tens of thousands of rounds at Luftwaffe bombers with minimal success. German aircraft attacked with relative impunity because British guns couldn't achieve sufficient hit rates. Something better was needed. Not incremental improvement, revolutionary change. The British had an idea. In August 1940, as part of the teasered mission that shared radar and other technologies with the United States, British scientists proposed developing a miniature radar set small enough to fit inside an artillery shell. The radar would detect when the shell passed close to a target and trigger detonation automatically. No timer, no altitude calculation, no hope, just physics and proximity. American scientists were skeptical. Fitting functional radar into a 5-inch shell seemed impossible. Radar sets in 1940 occupied entire rooms, required substantial power supplies, and were fragile even under careful laboratory conditions. Subjecting radar electronics to the 20,000 G acceleration of a gun firing, the spinning rotation that stabilized shells in flight, and the vibration and shock of high-velocity ballistics that seemed like science fiction. But the alternative was accepting that anti-aircraft gunnery would remain ineffective. The British proposal landed on the desk of Merle Tuve, director of the Department of Terrestrial Magnetism at the Carnegie Institution of Washington. Tuve was a physicist, not an engineer, but he understood the stakes. If the United States entered the war, increasingly likely by fall 1940, American forces would face the same anti-aircraft problems plaguing the British. Better to solve those problems now rather than learn the hard way through combat failures. Tuve assembled a team at the National Bureau of Standards in September 1940. The project was designated Section T of the National Defense Research Committee, which everyone shortened to Section T. The objective: develop a functional proximity fuse for anti-aircraft shells within 18 months. The budget, effectively unlimited. The priority, absolute. The technical challenges were enormous. Radar components in 1940 used glass vacuum tubes that shattered under even modest acceleration. Artillery shells experienced peak forces exceeding 20,000 times Earth's gravity during firing, forces that would crush most electronic components instantly. The shell rotated at 500 revolutions per second, creating gyroscopic forces that would tear loose any improperly mounted components. The shell flew at 2,500 feet per second through air that ranged from sea-level pressure to the near vacuum of high altitude. And it all had to work reliably, cost-effectively, and survive handling by gun crews operating in combat conditions. Section T approached the problem systematically. First challenge, hardened electronics. Glass vacuum tubes were redesigned with reinforced construction, shock-mounted in rubber cradles, and tested by firing prototype assemblies from compressed air guns. Each iteration revealed new failure modes, cracked filaments, shattered envelopes, loosened connections. Engineers redesigned, tested, failed, redesigned. By March 1941, they had vacuum tubes that could survive 20,000 G acceleration without immediate failure. Second challenge, miniaturization. Radar sets required transmitters, receivers, antennas, power supplies, and trigger circuits. All of this had to fit inside the nose cone of a 5-inch shell, occupying a space roughly 4 inches in diameter and 7 inches long. Every component was custom designed for minimum size. The transmitter used cavity magnetron technology operating at 180 MHz, high frequency for 1941, allowing small antenna dimensions. The receiver used a superheterodyne circuit with 4 vacuum tubes. The power supply consisted of a miniature battery and capacitor bank. The trigger circuit used a thyrotron tube that could handle the high current needed to fire the detonator. Third challenge, reliability. Early prototypes worked in laboratory conditions but failed in field testing. Salt spray corroded electrical contacts. Moisture infiltrated through imperfect seals. Temperature variations affected vacuum tube performance. The shells were supposed to be stored in ship magazines for months, survive rough handling during loading, withstand the explosive shock of firing, and detonate reliably when, and only when, within lethal range of a target. Achieving all this simultaneously took 18 months of iteration. By March 1942, Section T had working prototypes. The first combat tests occurred in May 1942 aboard USS Cleveland during anti-aircraft exercises near Norfolk. Cleveland's 5-inch guns fired 12 VT-fused shells at drone targets. 8 shells detonated properly. 2 failed to detonate at all. 2 detonated prematurely before approaching the targets. 67% reliability. Better than early prototypes, but nowhere near acceptable for combat deployment. The Navy wanted 90% reliability minimum. More iteration followed. Improved sealing prevented moisture infiltration. Better quality control reduced manufacturing defects. Redesigned trigger circuits minimized premature detonations. By September 1942, reliability reached 85%, close enough for limited combat deployment. The first operational use occurred in January 1943 during the Battle of Rennell Island in the Solomon Islands. USS Helena and other ships fired approximately 150 VT-fused shells at attacking Japanese aircraft. The result, 5 confirmed kills, several more damaged aircraft. For comparison, during similar engagements in late 1942 using conventional ammunition, those same ships typically required 500, 600 shells per kill. The 85% reliability meant 1 in 6 shells failed. Sometimes they failed by not detonating, annoying but tactically acceptable. Other times they failed by detonating prematurely, creating fragmentation hazards to friendly aircraft and ships. Worst case, they failed by not detonating, but landing intact where Japanese forces could recover them. Security concerns about VT technology were extreme. The Office of Naval Intelligence classified the fuses above top secret, creating a special security category called Most Secret, specifically for proximity fuse information. Sailors were prohibited from discussing VT ammunition, even with fellow crew members who didn't work with it directly. Usage required explicit authorization from task force commanders. Shells could only be fired over water where recovery by enemy forces would be difficult. Firing VT rounds over land was absolutely forbidden until November 1944, nearly 2 years after the technology became operational, because the risk of Japanese or German forces capturing intact shells, was considered unacceptable. These restrictions made VT ammunition tactically valuable but operationally limited. Gun crews knew the shells worked better than conventional rounds. They wanted to use VT ammunition whenever possible, but regulations demanded conservative use, saving VT rounds for scenarios where the tactical benefit clearly justified the security risk. Massed bomber formations, yes. Individual reconnaissance planes, no. Large-scale attacks, yes. Solo raiders, no. Saburo Kitamura, flying alone toward USS Hornet on August 14, 1944, represented exactly the kind of target that didn't justify VT usage. One aircraft, not a strategic threat, not worth the risk. Except Kitamura wasn't just one aircraft. He was one of the most dangerous pilots in the Pacific Theater, a man who'd personally damaged or sunk more U.S. ships than some entire Japanese squadrons. He was a threat that conventional anti-aircraft fire had failed to stop repeatedly. And Robert Carlson, gunner's mate aboard Hornet, had decided that stopping Kitamura was worth violating orders. Range 5 miles, the radar operator calls. Target descending now 15,000 feet. Angle of attack suggests dive bombing approach. Carlson makes final adjustments to the fire control solution. The computer provides data, but Carlson trusts his intuition more. Kitamura will feint high, then drop low and fast, approaching from an angle that makes optical tracking difficult. He'll rely on American gunners following doctrine, following computer solutions, following predictable patterns. Stand by, Carlson says. His hand rests on the firing key. The VT shell sits in the breech, its miniature radar system powered and ready. Inside the shell, components developed by hundreds of engineers over 4 years of intensive research wait to justify their existence. Vacuum tubes rated to survive 20,000 G forces. A magnetron transmitter no bigger than a thumb. A receiver circuit built from components that didn't exist in commercial electronics. A battery and capacitor bank designed to provide stable power through acceleration, flight, and detonation. All of it gambling that Kitamura will fly close enough for the shell to detect him. All of it depending on 85% reliability holding up for one more shot. All of it justified by Carlson's conviction that this particular target, this particular pilot, is worth the risk of court-martial and compromised security. Range 3 miles, target at 12,000 feet increasing speed. He's starting his attack run. Through binoculars, Carlson spots the Zero. It's a tiny silhouette against high clouds, almost invisible. No wonder radar is essential. Human eyes can't track aircraft reliably at these ranges and altitudes. The Zero banks left, beginning the attack approach that intelligence reports have documented. Kitamura's signature move: approach from northeast, descend to 8,000 feet, accelerate to maximum speed, drop bomb from 2,000 feet, pull up, and escape to the west. Carlson doesn't follow the actual aircraft. He tracks where it will be, where Kitamura needs to be to execute his attack. The gun mount swings smoothly, leading the target by 400 yards, elevating to intersect the predicted dive path. The fire control computer suggests different settings. It's optimizing for a target maintaining current altitude and bearing. But Kitamura won't maintain anything. He'll jink and dive and spiral because he knows American guns follow computer solutions. Carlson isn't following the computer. He's following his gut. Range 2 miles. Target at 9,000 feet descending. The Zero commits to its dive. Kitamura is coming in fast and steep exactly as predicted. The aircraft grows from a silhouette to a distinct shape. Wings, fuselage, cockpit canopy reflecting sunlight. It's beautiful in a terrible way, this machine built to kill, flown by a man who's exceptional at killing. Carlson doesn't hate Kitamura. He respects him. In another context, they might have been friends. 2 men who excel at their jobs, who understand their craft deeply, who push beyond doctrine to achieve what others consider impossible. But context is everything. They're enemies. One of them is about to die. Fire, Carlson says. The 5-inch gun roars. The VT shell leaves the barrel at 2,600 feet per second, accelerating from 0 to supersonic in the length of the gun tube. The forces are immense, 20,000 G peak acceleration, sustained forces exceeding 10,000 G for the duration of barrel transit. Inside the shell, vacuum tubes flex but don't shatter. Circuit boards strain but hold. The magnetron transmitter, built to survive exactly this abuse, begins operating milliseconds after firing. The shell climbs toward the Zero at a closing speed exceeding 3,000 feet per second. The miniature radar transmits pulses at 180 MHz, sweeping the sky ahead. The receiver listens for reflections. For most of the shell's flight, nearly 4 seconds, the receiver hears nothing. Empty sky. Ocean surface far below. Clouds that produce faint echoes but nothing resembling an aircraft. Then, at a range of 110 feet, the radar detects something solid. The reflection is unmistakable, metal shaped like an aircraft moving at high speed. The receiver amplifies the signal. The trigger circuit compares reflection strength to a preset threshold. When reflection strength exceeds threshold, the Therotron tube fires, discharging the capacitor bank through the detonator. The shell explodes 73 feet from Kitamura's Zero. The blast creates a pressure wave that propagates at supersonic speed, hitting the aircraft with forces equivalent to several tons of impact. Fragmentation, thousands of steel splinters traveling at 5,000 feet per second, shred the Zero's thin aluminum skin. The left wing disintegrates. The engine cowling tears open. Control cables sever. Hydraulic lines rupture. Kitamura feels the aircraft come apart around him. There's no warning, no time to react. One moment he's executing a perfect dive-bombing approach. The next moment his aircraft is fragments tumbling through sky. He reaches for the canopy release, trying to bail out. But the centrifugal forces are too great. The Zero is spinning, descending, breaking apart. The ocean rushes up. Impact comes at 300 miles per hour. Saburo Kitamura, 23 years old, 57 confirmed kills, one of the Imperial Japanese Navy's deadliest pilots, dies instantly. His Zero hits the Pacific in a spray of debris and fuel. The wreckage sinks in 2,000 feet of water, taking with it the man who'd terrorized American shipping for 3 weeks. On USS Hornet, Robert Carlson watches the Zero disintegrate and feels nothing. No satisfaction, no triumph, no relief. Just the professional acknowledgement that the target is destroyed. Job done, threat neutralized. He turns away from the gun mount before anyone can congratulate him, before anyone can ask questions about what kind of ammunition he fired. Secure the mount, he tells his crew. Standard rounds for next engagement, and nobody talks about what we used. Clear? They're clear. They've seen enough combat to understand that some things don't get discussed. The VT shell worked. The target is dead. Asking questions about unauthorized ammunition usage only creates problems. The deck shuddered with the concussion of the 5-inch gun, a sensation Carlson felt deep in his bones. In that moment, his world had shrunk to the smoke, the sea, and the screaming plane. The thought of the future, of ripples extending beyond his own survival, never even crossed his mind. He had fired the shell. The plane had disintegrated. For now, that was the entirety of the story. On August 14, 1944, none of that was visible. Carlson was simply a gunner who had violated orders and achieved results. Whether through luck or skill mattered less than the outcome. The official action report for August 14th lists Kitamura's death as enemy aircraft destroyed by anti-aircraft fire from USS Hornet. 5-inch battery, 1152 hours. Ammunition type standard HE, no mention of VT fuses, no mention of unauthorized usage, no mention of anything that would trigger security reviews. Just another kill recorded and forgotten. Except someone at Navy Intelligence notices something unusual. Kitamura was an elite pilot with extensive combat experience and exceptional situational awareness. Elite pilots don't get hit by conventional anti-aircraft fire during solo attacks. They're too good at evasion. But Kitamura died in a textbook proximity detonation, the kind that suggested VT ammunition. A quiet investigation begins. Nothing official, nothing that would appear in records. Just a few questions asked carefully. What ammunition did Hornet's gun mounts have loaded on August 14th? What were the engagement conditions? Did anyone observe unusual shell behavior? The investigation reaches Carlson in September. A lieutenant commander from Naval Intelligence interviews him privately. The conversation is brief and pointed. Gunner's Mate Carlson, we're reviewing the engagement that destroyed the Japanese aircraft on August 14th. I need to know what ammunition you used. Carlson considers lying. But he's not a liar, and the evidence is probably conclusive anyway. VT, sir, 1 shell. You understand that using VT ammunition against solo targets violates standing orders? Yes, sir. Why did you use it? Because conventional ammunition wasn't working, sir. That pilot had attacked us twice before. Both times, standard fire control solutions failed. He was too good. VT gave us a chance. The intelligence officer nods slowly. Did the shell perform as expected? Yes, sir. Clean detonation, optimal fragmentation pattern. Target destroyed. And you're aware that if the shell had failed to detonate and been recovered by Japanese forces, you'd be facing court-martial for compromising classified technology? Yes, sir. The officer closes his notebook. Gunner's mate Carlson, officially this conversation didn't happen. Officially, you used standard ammunition and got an exceptional result through superior marksmanship. Officially, VT ammunition was never fired outside authorized scenarios. Understand? Yes, sir. Unofficially, your action demonstrated that VT ammunition is effective against high-value solo targets when operated by experienced gun crews. Your success is being used to justify loosening restrictions on VT usage. By the end of the year, gunners across the fleet will have authorization to use VT in scenarios we currently prohibit. You won't receive recognition for this, because recognition would require admitting you violated orders. But your judgment was correct. The risk was justified. The result validated the entire VT program. Carlson says nothing. There's nothing to say. He made a tactical decision. It worked. The Navy is adapting doctrine to incorporate lessons learned. That's how war works. The officer leaves. The incident is closed. In official records, Kitamura's death remains a standard anti-aircraft kill. But in classified after-action analyses circulated through naval intelligence, it becomes a case study. The engagement demonstrates that VT ammunition can be decisive against elite pilots in solo attacks. The case study contributes to revised VT usage guidelines issued in October 1944, which expand authorization to include high-value individual targets when tactical conditions justify enhanced kill probability. This doctrinal change matters because by fall 1944, the Japanese are increasingly using solo attacks by elite pilots rather than massed formations. Kamikaze operations are beginning, and stopping individual suicide aircraft before they reach ships is critical. VT ammunition becomes the primary defense against kamikazes, improving kill rates from approximately 25% with conventional ammunition to over 50% with proximity fuses. Thousands of American sailors survive kamikaze attacks because VT shells detonate close enough to destroy or disable approaching aircraft. The technology that Carlson used without authorization on August 14th becomes, by November 1944, standard procedure. His violation of orders becomes doctrine. His gamble becomes policy. But Robert Carlson never knows this. He continues serving aboard Hornet through the end of the war, firing his 5-inch gun in dozens more engagements, accumulating 11 confirmed kills and numerous assists. He never uses VT ammunition again without proper authorization. The August 14th incident remains buried in classified files, referenced only in internal Navy analyses that Carlson never sees. He settles into the quiet rhythm of civilian life in Michigan, a man known for his steady work and his silence. When neighbors or new acquaintances, having learned he served in the Navy, press him for stories, he offers only generic replies about anti-aircraft duty and the monotony of convoy escort. The real story, the one about the experimental proximity fuse, the standing orders he violated to fire it at one of Japan's elite pilots, the single impossible shot that changed everything, and the classified doctrinal shifts that followed. That story remains locked away, a sealed file in a distant archive. The story stays classified for decades. The VT fuse itself is declassified in 1945 after the war ends and reverse engineering concerns become irrelevant. But specific engagement details, particularly those involving unauthorized ammunition usage, remain restricted. The Navy doesn't advertise that its most successful anti-aircraft innovation sometimes came from sailors violating orders. In 1969, a naval historian researching proximity fuse development requests access to combat action reports from 1944. The researcher, Dr. David Rosenberg, is investigating how VT ammunition transitioned from experimental technology to standard doctrine. He finds thousands of pages of engagement reports, testing data, and performance analyses. Buried in those documents is a brief reference to an August 1944 incident involving USS Hornet and exceptional single-shot performance against a priority target. The reference is vague, but Rosenberg is thorough. He cross-references dates, target descriptions, and ship positions. He finds Japanese records identifying Saburo Kitamura's loss on August 14, 1944, in the vicinity of Saipan. He finds Hornet's action report listing an anti-aircraft kill at the exact time and location. He finds internal Navy intelligence memos discussing unauthorized but effective VT usage, without specifying details. Eventually, he finds Robert Carlson's name in a personnel roster. He tracks Carlson to an address in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and sends a letter requesting an interview about the August 14, 1944 engagement. Carlson is 62 years old in 1969, retired from a career as a mechanical engineer at an automotive plant. He's never told anyone, not his wife, not his children, not his friends, about using VT ammunition without authorization. The letter from Dr. Rosenberg is the first indication that anyone outside the Navy knows. They meet in January 1970. Rosenberg brings declassified documents and a tape recorder. Carlson brings memories. "I need you to understand something," Carlson says. "What I did was wrong according to regulations. I knew it was wrong when I did it. I did it anyway because the alternative was letting that pilot kill more of my shipmates. The Navy can court-martial me now if they want. I don't care. But I won't apologize for the decision." Rosenberg smiles. The Navy isn't interested in court-martial. They're interested in understanding how operational innovations emerge from field conditions. You violated orders, but you did so with clear tactical justification. Your action demonstrated that VT ammunition was being underutilized due to excessive security concerns. The restrictions were loosened partly because your success proved they were unnecessarily limiting. I didn't know that. How could you? The whole point of compartmentalized security is that individual operators don't know the broader implications of their actions. But the broader implication of your action was significant. By demonstrating VT effectiveness against solo targets, you contributed to expanded usage authorization that improved anti-aircraft performance across the fleet. Carlson is silent for a moment. That pilot, Kitamura, do you know anything about him? Rosenberg opens a folder. Japanese records identify him as Warrant Officer Saburo Kitamura, born 1921 in Hiroshima. Joined the Imperial Navy in 1938, pilot training completed 1940. First combat action in China 1941. Participated in operations at Pearl Harbor, Wake Island, and Rabaul. By 1944, he'd accumulated 57 confirmed kills and was considered one of the elite, known for solo operations and exceptional bombing accuracy. He was 23 when I killed him. Yes, I was 37, 14 years older. More experienced in some ways, but he was the better warrior. He just didn't have the technology. Rosenberg considers this. Would it have made a difference? If he'd known about VT fuses, would he have changed his tactics? Maybe, probably not. Elite pilots believe in their abilities. They think they can evade anything. Kitamura had evaded conventional anti-aircraft fire dozens of times. Why would this time be different? He couldn't know I was using ammunition that didn't require precise prediction. He couldn't know the shell would detonate based on proximity rather than timer. The technology was invisible to him until it killed him. That's the nature of technical innovation in warfare. The side with better technology wins engagements even when individual skill favors the other side. Carlson nods. I've thought about that a lot. If we'd fought with equivalent technology, me and Kitamura, he probably would have won. He was the better tactician, the better warrior, probably the better man. But I had the better shell, so he's dead and I'm alive. War isn't fair. The interview continues for 3 hours. Rosenberg asks about technical details, operational procedures, decision-making processes. Carlson answers carefully, providing information about what he did and why, avoiding speculation about broader implications. He's not comfortable being cast as some kind of hero or innovator. He fired a gun. The shell worked. The target died. Nothing heroic about it, but Rosenberg sees something Carlson doesn't. The interview reveals that effective military innovation often comes from field operators violating doctrine when circumstances justify it. Carlson used VT ammunition without authorization because regulation didn't match tactical reality. The regulation assumed VT should be conserved for mass formations. Tactical reality showed that some solo targets were worth the risk. Carlson's willingness to violate orders, combined with his skill in executing the shot, demonstrated that the regulations were wrong. The Navy learned from this. Doctrine adapted, and thousands of sailors benefited from the adaptation. Rosenberg's research is published in 1974 as The Development and Tactical Employment of Radio Proximity Fuses. The book includes a detailed analysis of the August 14, 1944, engagement, though it refers to Carlson only as an experienced gunner's mate aboard USS Hornet, without providing his name. The analysis concludes, operational innovation often emerges when field operators exercise judgment that contradicts standing orders. The challenge for military organizations is creating doctrine flexible enough to accommodate such judgment while maintaining necessary security and coordination. The book becomes required reading at the Naval War College. Future officers study Carlson's decision as a case example of tactical judgment overriding procedural restrictions. Some students argue Carlson should have been court-martialed for violating orders. Others argue he should have been decorated for exceptional initiative. The debate continues. Robert Carlson dies in 1987 at age 80. His obituary mentions his Navy service during World War II, but provides no details. His family doesn't know he violated orders to kill a legendary Japanese pilot. His co-workers don't know he contributed to changing anti-aircraft doctrine. The story remains obscure, known only to military historians and Naval War College students. But the lesson survives. Modern military doctrine explicitly acknowledges that field operators sometimes need to deviate from standing orders when circumstances justify it. Training emphasizes judgment and initiative alongside procedural compliance. The idea that innovation can emerge from violations of doctrine, carefully considered violations based on tactical necessity, is now accepted. That acceptance traces back to cases like Carlson's. An operator who recognized that regulations were preventing effective action, who calculated the risks of violating those regulations, who executed his judgment successfully, and who accepted that success wouldn't bring recognition because recognition would require admitting the violation. The proximity fuse itself evolved dramatically after World War II. Modern systems use solid-state electronics instead of vacuum tubes, radar frequencies in the gigahertz range, and sophisticated signal processing that can distinguish aircraft from decoys. Hit rates exceed 90%, reliability approaches 99%. The technology that was experimental and controversial in 1944 is now standard across military forces worldwide. But the basic principle remains unchanged. Detonate the shell when it gets close to the target. No timer, no prediction, just physics and proximity. It's elegant, it's effective, and it was tested in combat by a gunner who decided that killing one particular pilot was worth risking his career. Saburo Kitamura never knew what killed him. The Zero disintegrated so quickly that he likely had no time to react. He died without realizing he'd been hit by experimental technology fired without authorization. Carlson tested the anti-aircraft rounds not in a laboratory, but in the crucible of combat, where a field test meant violating orders and hoping to avoid a court-martial. Then he fired the shot that downed the ace. One shell, one kill, one moment that validated 4 years of research and changed anti-aircraft doctrine for the rest of the war. Nobody knew except Carlson, his gun crew, and a few intelligence officers. The secret stayed classified for 25 years. By the time it emerged, the technology had evolved beyond recognition, and the tactical context had disappeared into history. But the principle survived. When doctrine fails, when regulations prevent effective action, when the enemy is winning, sometimes you have to violate orders and trust your judgment. Sometimes you load the experimental round, ignore the manual, and take the shot. Carlson took the shot. The shell worked. The ace died. And anti-aircraft warfare changed forever, even though nobody knew it yet. That's innovation, silent, unauthorized, effective. Tested in combat by operators willing to risk everything for a tactical advantage. The gunner who violated doctrine to use experimental ammunition. The proximity fuse that detonated 73 feet from the target. The ace who died never knowing what killed him. And the war that continued, one shot at a time, each one a tiny modification to doctrine and technology, until the cumulative weight of innovation overwhelmed the enemy. August 14, 1944, one shell, one kill, one moment when everything changed. In silence, always in silence. Because the best innovations are the ones the enemy never sees coming. O Zero, já consumido pelas chamas, desintegrou-se no ar, seus destroços em chamas sumindo no azul infinito. Then it's too late.